Okay. Um, I don't know how you intend to display these pictures along with the text, but I think that will be a very, very impressive, enjoyable way to display the family history, to have my memories along with the pictures. And this picture here is a picture of my grandfather Rauer and my grandmother Rauer and their first child. The little girl's name is Theresa Leah, not Teresa, she told me, but Theresa, and the middle name Leah, Leah, maybe. Anyway, my grandfather's name was John Antoine Rauer, Rauer, and he was an immigrant from Austria. He was born in a little village in Austria called Erdberg in 1871. I've looked and looked and searched for many years, and I still can't find the name of the ship that they came over to America on, and I can't find anything more about the family farther back in Austria. So we don't know very many facts. And I expect if I had asked my grandfather while he was living, it would have really delighted him to be asked those questions. Actually, people didn't speak to my grandfather too much. Excuse me, I need my water close. My throat's getting burny. My grandfather was not very talkative, and it seemed to me that people really did not talk to him as often as they should, or for very long at a time, because he still spoke, even in old age, with a very pronounced Austrian or German accent. He spoke German, as all Austrians do, and he had quite an accent, even in old age. But anyway, the story we do know for a fact is that Grandpa, his brother Frank, 2 years younger, their mother Mary, and their little half-sister Agnes, along with their uncle, their mother's brother, whose name was Ignaz Ignazhas. And it is believed that all of them came at the same time. In 1887, we were told, but I can't even find the exact date of that because I can't find the ship records.
On Ancestry, it says 1888.
What?
On Ancestry, there's a document that says 1888.
I can't hear you.
It's okay. Just keep talking. Just keep talking.
I'm waiting to see what you asked me.
Just keep talking.
So they came to America. They are supposed to have landed in New York Harbor and then taken a train to St. Louis. And from St. Louis, I'm not sure how, I suppose on another train, they ended up settling in Lynn County, Missouri, in a very rural area. The boys grew up. They were very honest, honorable young men. When they first came as teenagers, they were very, very good-looking young men. My daughter has just given me a written message that says some of the census records she has seen say that they came in 1888. Actually, in all the different census and all the different people, it does not give the same year every time. And even in the same census, Grandpa might say one year, Agnes another year, and Frank another year. But it's someplace between 1887 and about 1889. We are absolutely sure of that. When Grandpa was a fairly young man, I'm not sure exactly how old, he took all the tests he needed to, even though he didn't speak very good English, and he was very proud to be naturalized to become a United States citizen. He lived on a farm most of his life, the same farm in Missouri, but after Aunt Thressy was born, the couple did take Thressy and they did move to Richland County, Ohio. And they did that because my grandmother Rauer, her name was Constance Viola McCollum, and her mother's name was Emma Cotty before she married David McCollum. And the Cotty family had come from Richland County, Ohio. And a lot of the Cotty relatives that I guess must have kept in touch through letters or something like that, they did know each other. And Grandmother was just determined that Grandpa could make some money working out in Ohio in a tool factory, a steel factory, steel tubes, I think they called it. And there was such a factory in the area where they settled. And this was the area where Grandmother's Cotty relatives had come many, many, many years before. So she wanted to be out there living close to her mother's family. They lived in Ohio 7 years, and then they came right back to Lynn County, Missouri. While they were living in Ohio, they had 2 other children, 3 others actually, I believe. They had David, my dad, Carlos McCollum Rauer, and his sister Faye, my Aunt Faye. And then they came back to Missouri, where the rest of their 9 children were born. Uncle Frank lived on a farm too, and he and his wife lived in the Shelby community. And their little sister Agnes grew up to marry Dr. John Boyles. He was about the only doctor for a while in the Shelby community, and he doctored people for many, many miles around. In fact, he was my mother's doctor at the time I was born in 1931. And he and Agnes were very, very happily married, although Dr. Boyles was a lot older than Agnes. I think as much as 20 years older. and they had a large family of children also. And Uncle Frank had a large family of children also. But of course, John's and Frank's two families, their children were very closely connected cousins because they lived so close to each other. And I knew most of Uncle Frank's children as I was growing up, too. Of course, they were grown up.
What was Frank's wife's name? What was Frank's wife's name?
Uncle Frank's wife was Margaret Ann Smith, I believe. And her father had quite an interesting history, all concerning his time at the time of the Civil War. I don't think I should be going into that right now. It would probably confuse everyone. But nevertheless, his ancestry, his father was, his wife's father is very interesting and very unusual. And when I was a child and I was living with my Kirk grandparents during the school year, and I rode on the bus from their farm in the Shelby area, the few miles to Shelby School. And Uncle Frank's son, Niall Rauer, Daddy's first cousin, was one of my bus drivers. And later on, Kurt Rauer, another one of his sons, was also one of my bus drivers. And I remember one time that I was told to stay on the school bus when I was picked up at school, and I went around the whole route to deliver all the other children. And then Niall Rauer took me home with him on the bus. He lived at home with his parents then on the farm near Shelby. And my mother and dad and my little baby sister Neva were there. And I don't remember why, but we had a good time. But we stayed all night with that family. I do remember that. And Grandma's family was very interesting. The Cotties were very interesting. Grandma's father, David McCollum, was cutting timber when he was 39 years old, and I believe she was 9, just a little girl, and she had 3 brothers, but she was the only girl. And her father was killed cutting timber. A tree fell on him, and after he was killed, her mother took all of her children, and they lived with her father, Francis Augustus Cotty, and his second wife, who had moved to Missouri by that time from Ohio. And they were a very interesting family. And I guess that it's...
Tell about what happened to John Antoine's father. Why didn't he come to America?
Oh, Grandpa's father. That's right, I shouldn't have forgotten that. Grandpa's parents were named Carl and Mary Rauer. We are not even real sure if Carl's name was spelled C or K for the first letter. A lot of people tell us that in Germany, Carl was often spelled K, so it may be that his was. But in any event, he died while serving in the Austrian army. It was required in Austria at that time, and probably earlier and later too, that every able-bodied man in Austria between certain ages had, by the law, to register and serve in the army, but they didn't go in for like 3 or 4 or 5 years. It was like our National Guard. They were just required to maybe serve for about 3 months. Then they would be home for about 3 months. And then they would have another term of service. And I don't know if they were at war or not. They were always having wars. But in any event, my Grandpa Rauer's father, Carl, died during the time he was away, during one of the times that he was serving in the army. And not being able to speak German, I've really been hampered in my search because I need someone to write a lot of German letters or something for me and write in German or try to get hold of records that are recorded in German. I'm sure they're available. I just need help with that. So we don't really have details of when Carl died exactly or why, but Grandpa was born in 1871 and Frank in 1873. Then their little half-sister Agnes, their mother remarried, and Agnes was not born until 1881. So someplace along there after Frank was born in 1873 would have been the time that Carl would have died, and then their mother remarried. We don't know what happened to Agnes's father either, because as far as we know, he never came to America either.
And on one of the census records, it says that they were from Czechoslovakia. Tell us about that.
I did all the census when I first started researching, because you can learn so much from the census. It's not necessarily all absolutely true. It makes a big difference who answered and how much they knew or were willing to tell. But it's pretty accurate, and it certainly proves where they were at a certain time. The census was done every 10 years, and there were many states who had state census in between those years. I have done a few state census, but the ones I have done haven't really given me any new information that I didn't know. But if I didn't already know that from family, word of mouth, or records, then they would be very helpful. But every 10 years there was a new census, and the census have now been released. The last one released was in 1940. So we have from 1850 to 1940 that we can research and find names and birthplaces. There are earlier census before 1850 that we can also get from the very first after the Revolution, but they'd only give the name of the head of household and the ages of everyone in the house. They don't give any other information as a rule. They don't give places of birth or names. So we have to start with the 1850. That was the first census to give first names, and then just follow it through for every 10 years. But the reason we can't find more about Grandpa's mother, Mary, who died shortly before 1900 or shortly before 1890, is because the 1890 census, which would have told all about her, was all destroyed in a fire where they were kept in nationally, and that information pretty much was all destroyed. And by 1900, when the census told even more than previous census had, Grandpa's mother had died. So we don't know, that's why we don't know more about her.
You're going to talk about Czechoslovakia.
Some of the census say that Grandpa and Frank were born in Czechoslovakia. And that I was really startled when I first saw that, but now I understand it, because after World War I, part of Austrian territory actually became part of Czechoslovakia. And evidently Grandpa's village was one of the places that was then located in Czechoslovakia. But I stood at my grandma and grandpa's back screen door, and my grandma was talking to me from the kitchen through the screen door when I was just a very young child. And it was just at the beginning of World War II. We were not even in the war yet. And Grandma said, my first name is Carlita, so all the Rauers called me that, and all of my mother's family, the Kirks, called me June. And some people called me Carlita June. But anyway, Grandma Rauer said, oh, Carlita, we just heard on the radio that your grandpa's village was completely destroyed by the Germans, and that had happened evidently just the day before. And I just wish that I'd been old enough then to know it was important enough to try to talk to Grandpa and ask him more about it. And so apparently then, but apparently by that time, it was part of Czechoslovakia. But it was still the same village. And at the time he was born in it, it was Austria. And his ancestors apparently were all Austrian. Do you need to know anything else about Grandpa?
No. Can you tell us more about who's in that other picture?
Yes, that other picture, it looks like the ladies are pretty well dressed up. And my dad's wearing overalls. And the youngest uncle, my Uncle Cletus, over on this end, is wearing overalls. But Roy's kind of dressed up. Luther is not wearing overalls. Or I mean, Roy. Rex is a little bit dressed up in that tie. And of course, Uncle Luther was an educator, a school superintendent, and held many positions in education, both in Missouri and in Iowa, and had moved to Iowa in later years, and it had quite a lot to do with the Iowa State Educational Committee. My family, myself, my husband, my little kids were living in Des Moines at that time. And Uncle Luther, when he would come to an educational meeting, he would often come over and see me or call me on the phone. And when I was little, I knew every one of these uncles and aunts and their wives, of course. This, if I could point to the people.
Just okay. Who's in the back row? Who's the first one on the?
Is it written in order in the back?
No, just tell me. Who's that? The first person.
This is Roy.
Okay, and that's your dad.
Or I mean, not Roy. Rex.
Rex.
Daddy. Roy. Luther. Cletus. Faye. Grandma. Grandpa. Thressy.
And Thressy. So that's 7 children. You said they had 9 children?
They had 9. They lost their oldest child, or their oldest boy, and their youngest child. And they were both boys. Little David, who would have been next to Thressy in age, was born in Ohio while they were living there. And he also died in Ohio before they moved back to Missouri. He died about age 5. He had a respiratory ailment, something about breathing, and he died, I guess, during some kind of a breathing spell when he was about 5. Now I found, Irv and I, my husband, went to Ohio and did searching, met some distant cousins that were still there who were very helpful. They were mostly Cotties, and they took us around to the original Cotty homestead, and just a lot of history and a lot of pictures and the best homemade cake. They were so hospitable, and we really enjoyed our visit in Ohio. And while we were there, I spent about 2 days going to the Richland County Courthouse and the adjoining county courthouse, because both of those counties had records of Richland County. And I found the 3 birth certificates for Daddy, for David, and for Aunt Faye, but I could not find David's death certificate. And I was told by some of the people in the historical societies and the places where I researched that there had been, well, something like we're having with the virus, I suppose, only I don't think it was as long lasting, but there had been a widespread disease going through that part of the country, and people had died more rapidly than they could keep up with the bodies, actually. And it was a very sad time in that area's history.
Would that have been the 1918?
That was in Richland County, Ohio.
Would that have been the 1918 pandemic?
What?
Would that have been the 1918 pandemic?
No, this was back when little David was a little boy. I'm telling what I was told, the reason he might have died. I couldn't find his certificate or his burial place, but they had told me about this disease and that many people had been buried really quickly, you know, and maybe the record of that little boy might have been lost. But they said that there were people buried in one cemetery that through the years it's no longer there, and that those bodies had been removed to another cemetery. And they said if he hadn't had a marker, and I don't know if he did or not, or if the marker was gone, then there were probably bodies moved that they did not know who they were. But anyway, that little boy is lost. But I feel with so many new records available, on Ancestry and every place that if I ever really get the time to really stick with the research, that maybe I will find more about him.
So
And there's always newspapers, which are time consuming, but there's a lot of material in them.
what year would he have been born? Like around 1903
yeah.
or 4?
Well, I have that, of course, in my main records, but I would have to get off here and go get the records.
What year was your dad born, Carlos?
What?
What year was your father born?
Daddy was born in 1904.
And David was younger than him or older?
David was born next to Thressie.
So he was
Thressie
older.
was born in Missouri before they went to Ohio.
So David was born somewhere between 1900
I
and
believe-
1904.
I believe David must have been born around 1898 because Aunt Faye was born in 1902. Or maybe that was David. No, I think David was born shortly before 1900. Aunt Faye was born 1902 and Daddy was born 1904. And David died when he was about 5. So this would have been about 1907.
Thressie was born in 1897, right?
About that.
And what year did they move to Ohio?
What?
What year did they go to Ohio? When did they move to Ohio?
Well, this picture must have been taken shortly before they moved.
So around the turn
That
of
was
the
taken
century.
in Missouri, and Thressie looks about 2 there.
Right. I'm guessing that picture was 1899.
I imagine.
So maybe David was born around 1900?
Yeah.
Okay.
And on the 1900 census, they are in Ohio.
Okay.
They're recorded in Ohio.
So David died when he was 5, and then who's the other child that died?
What?
Who's the second child who died?
Oh, that was their youngest child of all. His name was Don Ellis. Not Donald, just Don, and the middle name Ellis. And he died of typhoid fever. And I know that from his death certificate. Missouri has death certificates online, a lot on Ancestry, but they're also on the site of the Secretary of State of Missouri, and they're wonderful. They're from 1910 clear up, I believe, to about the mid-1970s. So if you had a death of a family member through there, you can easily find the death certificate if it was in Missouri. I don't know of any other state that has such a good setup for the certificates that has made them so readily available. And it's just wonderful. You go in there and it's got a picture of the actual certificate. And of course you can make it bigger and print it out or whatever. It tells what they died of, who the doctor was, where they are buried, who the undertaker was, who their parents were. It gives a lot of information. But unfortunately, Grandpa Rauer's own death certificate did not tell his parents' names.
It did tell his cause of death, though.
Yes, it did. But little Don Ellis, I didn't know what he died of until I read this. I think he died in 1922. I may be a year or two off that, but I believe it was 1922. And he was 2 years old, just a little toddler. And his death certificate says typhoid fever.
So
And Rex, my Uncle Rex, said that he remembered Don Ellis, that he cried. He was so sick, and he cried and he cried, kind of moaned. And he said that last night before he died, that their mother, Grandma, sat in a rocking chair and just rocked him and rocked him almost all night. But, that was pretty serious illness, so. But anyway, and I've got to look those up, I've got a great big charcoal portrait of both little boys, of David and of Don Ellis. And my Uncle Cletus gave them to me.
Huh. So, John Antoine, your grandfather, died in 1955.
Yes, I know that Grandpa died in 1955 because Kim was 1 year old, and I'd been wanting to go down and say goodbye to Grandpa and see him for myself, although I'd been told that he wouldn't know me, that he had been in and out of kind of a coma, in and out of it, and that when he was aware, or when he did wake up sort of, that he spoke German, so a lot of them couldn't understand him. So Irv had to go someplace in the truck, of course, and deliver some cars or go get some cars or something. So Kim and I rode down there with Irv. I don't think Irv was driving the automobile transport yet. He started that when you were a baby. Irv was still driving the produce truck for Easter's food stores. And they didn't care if I rode with him. They were like family almost. But anyway, baby Kim, 1 year old, and I rode with Irv down to Missouri, and he let us off at Linnaeus in front of my grandma and grandpa's house. And they were living in the town of Linnaeus at the time. And my parents were there, so Kim and I got off there. And Grandpa was still living, but he died 2 days later. But anyway, Madeline and Cletus were there. All the kids were taking turns sitting with him, for a while. There was always 1 or 2 of the kids at least there with Grandma. And Madeline and Cletus and Mother and Daddy were there when Kim and I got there. And I wanted to go in and see Grandpa right away. And Madeline said, well, you can, but don't expect him to know you. He isn't knowing anybody and all that. So I walked in there and Grandpa had his eyes shut and he was like asleep. And I just took his hand and I said, hi, Grandpa. And Grandpa said, hi, Carlita.
And you got to meet Kim.
So he did know me.
And you got to meet Kim? Did he see Kim? He saw Kim as a baby? He saw Kim.
No, I don't believe he did. I don't think he would have known that. Oh. I don't think I took Kim in. And I don't believe he was alert enough he would have realized. But he did know me. He still, I think, had his eyes shut, in fact. But he either said hi or hello, I'm not sure which. I know I said hi, Grandpa, and took his hand and squeezed it, and it was like he squeezed my hand back. And he said, he might have said hello, that would sound more like him. But anyway, he called me Carlita, so he did know me, which seemed to disturb Madeline. I guess he didn't know her, or he acted like he didn't.
And what did he die of?
Well, his death certificate says he had cancer, but he had other things too. And I didn't know that. None of us did. So I was surprised when I did find his death certificate online, and he had other things too. And he also had what they call hardening of the arteries. But I do know that it was 1955.
Didn't it say he died? The main cause of death was an aneurysm, wasn't it?
What?
An aneurysm? Isn't that what his main cause of death was? An aneurysm, I think. I thought it said it was an aneurysm caused by hardening of the arteries.
Well, maybe it did. I just remember the hardening.
And then it did say.
Why did you look up his certificate?
Yeah, I saw it last night.
Isn't it wonderful the way you can find? I've got a whole file of certificates on so many people.
So tell me then about when did your grandmother...
Isn't it wonderful how you can just read them?
When did your grandmother die, Constance?
When did who?
Your grandmother, Constance. When did she die?
Oh, okay. After Daddy stopped farming, they moved over to Wheeling, which is actually in Livingston County, same as Chillicothe, but you know, it's next door to Lynn. And they took over a big nursing home. We're managing it, of older people. And of course, Daddy was good at that because everybody really liked Daddy, you know. And Daddy and Mother were managing this nursing home. And they were pretty happy there. It was right next door to a laundromat. And Daddy just loved going over and sitting in the laundromat and you know, talking to all the people that came in.
But when did your grandmother Constance die?
She was living with them at the nursing home.
Okay. I remember that nursing home. When was that? Because
a big house.
Yeah. But when was that? Because I remember being there.
That was in Wheeling.
So what year, though, was it?
What?
What years would it have been? I remember it.
Yeah. You ought to.
I was probably 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah.
So early 60s?
Yeah.
In the early 60s?
Grandma
probably?
died after Daddy did. Daddy died in 1964, you know.
Oh, okay.
At exactly age 60. And Grandma didn't die until, well, no, that's not. Daddy died while Grandma was living there as a patient.
Okay. So I remember Grandpa, but I don't remember her. I don't remember.
I think that Daddy died before Grandma because I think somebody said that Grandma realized that one of her sons had died, but she was really kind of out of it then. And I think she said, which one of my sons did they carry away dead when the undertaker came? But now I'm trying to think, where did Grandma die? Because Mother, it was too much, and she left that nursing home after Daddy died and went to Kansas City. So was Grandma still in the nursing home when she died? I'll have to look up her certificate and see. The other kids probably remember.
I would have met her, right?
You remember my Grandma Rauer?
I don't remember her, but I remember Grandpa. I remember your dad, but I don't remember your grandma.
Yeah. Do you remember your Grandpa Carlos?
Yes. Very much so.
He sure thought you were a sweet little girl.
But I don't know why I don't remember her, because I surely would have met her.
Well, I'm pretty sure he did die first. I think she must have died about 2 years after Daddy.
Was she sick for a long time?
So she must have died around 1966.
Was she sick, or did she have dementia or something, or?
What?
Was she sick, or did she have dementia or anything?
Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly what was wrong with her. We can surely look up her certificate.
Because I don't remember her at all.
Well, she would have just been one of the patients to you, you know. Probably. You weren't very old.
But I would have thought I would have known she was my grandmother, my
But
great-grandmother.
boy, you know, that I'm pretty sure it was about 2 years later. But I'm pretty sure Mother didn't try to stay there and do that by herself. I think real soon after that she took Janet and Terry and Mike and moved to Kansas City.
Well, we'll look it up. But and then is that when she moved to Kansas City is when she met Cecil Edmonds?
What?
When she moved to Kansas City is when she met Cecil Edmonds then?
Well, probably not right away, but
No, but after she moved
yeah,
to Kansas City.
after that.
Is there anything else you want to say or you're getting too tired?
No, it's now Grandma's. Grandma was. They called her Connie, of course. She was I think Constance is a beautiful name, and kind of unusual, I think, for that time. Maybe, not too many people were named that. But Grandma was the daughter of David McCollum and Emma Cotty. And then the McCollums go way, way back. They were really early pioneers, some of the very first in the Lynn County area. And they just, in one little cemetery in Lynn County, in fact, there are about 5 generations of McCollums, and the first one buried there was buried before 1800. So that's how far back they go. But I have the McCollum family generation after generation proved way back, and they were in the United States long before the American Revolution, where of course the Rauers were recent immigrants. And it's interesting about Grandma's it's interesting about Grandma's mother, Emma's mother, who was named Mary Ann Figgins, and she was the first wife of Grandma's Grandpa Cotty that they went to live with before he came to Missouri. And when we were out in Ohio, the cousins there told us where Mary Ann Figgins was buried in Milan, Ohio. And it was about an hour's drive from where the cousins lived. So we went there, and it was on a Sunday. It was a wonderful trip. They have an old inn there that was there like for 150 years. And there's pictures, paintings that show people at the inn generations before. And they have people in that town still who have pictures of their ancestors, and they just go over to the painting and pick them out. A lot of them are painted in. And Herb and I ate at that inn. They were still serving meals. But we went to the cemetery to look for Grandma's grandma. And because her grandma, she called Grandma in Missouri, was his second wife, Gus Cotty's second wife. So anyway, this is serendipity, quite a story. And it was Sunday, so we couldn't get to all the museums and things, but we knew the cemetery, and we found the cemetery, and it was just a small town, but the cemetery was really old and really huge. So we didn't know how in the world we were going to find her grave, and Irv wanted to get on the road again the next day. So I was really disappointed. I didn't think we would get to find her grave. But we started just driving through the cemetery, down one little street like they have in the cemeteries, the little streets, you know. And we were going down one street, going kind of slow, and Irv started laughing. And I said, well, that's not very proper, laughing in the cemetery. And he stopped and he said, look. And there was Grandma's grave right there, neck on the road, facing the road right there where we could see it from the car. Now, wasn't that serendipity?
So I'm sure your sister Connie is named after your grandmother Constance,
Yes.
right?
Yes, and I guess the Ann is after Grandma Kirk. You know.
Is Antoinette Cunningham named after John Antoine? Or is that just coincidence?
John Michael, you mean?
No. Antoinette Cunningham. Is she named after John Antoine?
Oh, yeah. Neva talked about Grandpa's name so much. Yeah, the Antoinette.
Okay.
That's what gave Joyce the idea to
I never knew that. Okay.
to name her that. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to say? You've been talking almost an hour.
Is that all you want to know for now?
You want to say goodbye?
Or is that all we're going to do for the hours? I'd sure like to know more about them. If I could afford it, I would hire a researcher.
Say goodbye. I think you need to quit for tonight.
Okay. I don't know how bad I looked this time. Maybe better than last time.